I just want to introduce you and say that you are the head of Unite Here Too, a member of the SF Labor Council. And you're here to talk to us about the state of labor today in San Francisco, coming out of the pandemic, going into God knows what. But we look to be enlightened by you, and we will have questions for you later. As I told you before, we have a couple of pre-selected questions, which I will ask you later. So over to you, sir.
Yeah, no, happy to join you tonight. I'm actually not, I'm president of the San Francisco Labor Council, which is the coalition of unions within San Francisco. And the president of Local 2, I was president of Local 2 for 21 years. And the current president is named Anand Singh. But in any event, we have worked together in coalition in years past, particularly around the Airbnb fights that we had early on in the city. Number of community organizations, including your own, and unions, including us, and pretty interesting coalition, including a lot of landlord organizations as well. Including tenant organizations. It was a very unique coalition that came together to fight Airbnb and the big capital that was financing those campaigns. And it was, I was reminded the other day that, in fact, you and your organizations were closely allied with us. So it's good to be with you again in that way. When Charles asked me to speak, he told me you wanted to somebody wanted to kind of get an overview of where we are in the labor movement. I know Claire, and Claire knows me pretty well. She's an officer of the Labor Council as well. But I figured I'd talk a little bit about where we are locally, but as well as at the state level for 5 minutes or so, and then we can get into questions and answers and discussion if you like. The place where we are right now is really unique. I've been in the labor movement for actually 40 years now, and as a shop steward, as a organizer, rank and file activist, and a leader. And this period is like, you see it as a renaissance for those of us who've been really toiling a long time against some incredibly difficult, powerful interests that have, basically corrupted the system of union organizing at the federal level. Because the fact is, in the private sector, it is virtually impossible to get a free and fair process that allows workers to organize. And that's going to be changing, in my belief, in my view, given that recent polls have shown the highest support for organized labor in probably 40 years, where 71% of people polled said they favor unions. When you poll people about whether they would join a union or not, it's always over 50% of people say, yeah, if I had a chance to join a union, I would. But it's exciting to look at what has come out of the pandemic, yet again, and renewed heightened attention to the income, and privilege inequality that exists in our society, at the very systematic, at the very base of the system, organizations and everything. And in fact, we're seeing companies get organized that were thought of as unorganizable, like Amazon and Starbucks, and different companies are now very much vulnerable. Now, unfortunately, the law still favors employers, and still very much favors unlawful, or permits unlawful actions. It takes years for workers to be restored to their jobs when they get fired in an organizing drive. So those obstacles still exist, but there is, especially among young people, a real commitment to fight back. And during the pandemic, we had a huge war in the state of California right here about the very rights of workers after legislation was passed, AB 5, that finally addressed the abuse of workers who are independently contracted. AB 5, Assembly Bill 5 was passed and gave workers the right to actually be employees. And it confirmed a court decision which laid forth a number of rights of employees who were wrongfully misclassified as independent contractors. And when you're classified as an independent contractor, there is not, any Medicare contributions, there is not Social Security, there is not unemployment insurance, that is so many rights and things that are statutory in society are denied for independent contractors. And so the high tech, money came in and was able to actually put legislation which carved out the Uber, Lyft, and a couple other companies from being required to live up to the law of AB 5. And so they moved Prop 22. You all remember it. People voted on it. It was the most money spent, I think, on any statewide proposition, not just in California, but in US history. It passed and it demonstrated that, billion-dollar corporations could basically write their own laws for their own industry, which is a real threat, of course. And so what we're seeing is resistance to those kinds of things. And that's, manifesting itself in more organizing drives. Locally in San Francisco, there's been a lot of fights through the pandemic. Notably the teachers and the janitors had, huge campaigns to protect workers' rights during the pandemic, and then how to deal with the issues that were around their particular industries. And so they came through that pretty strong. Right now we have the National Union of Healthcare Workers on strike, and they're fighting for not just a fair workload, but in effect worker or patients' rights. Mental health professionals are continually overstretched. It's impossible for people to get the care that they need. And there's a real mental health crisis in this, as well as health crisis in general in this country, in this state. And NUHW is launching a fight together with other unions, but particularly they're on the front line right now fighting on that. Local 2, the union I work with in Unite Here, which is the hospitality, gaming, and food service union. We're in several fights, preparing right now to probably be on strike before long at the airport, where approximately 1,000 workers have been without a wage increase since 2018, where their healthcare contributions, employers have fallen way behind what's required on healthcare, behind other employers like hotels, and who are trying to say no to any stabilization of the pension and improvement. So we're having a huge war with employers that charge $20 for a cheeseburger at the airport, which of course is a captive audience. Together with that and other fights coming up, probably with hotels airline catering, and the private clubs in this city, where we're going to have fights. I anticipate, there's going to be a lot of fighting, at least in the private sector, over the course of the next 6 months to a year or two, in this city, over workers, demanding back what the corporations have stolen from us, especially during this pandemic, both in the areas of health and safety and in the area of real, economic stability. So that's kind of where we are at state level. There's a lot of stuff going on. We're watching to see whether or not and actually advocating for the governor to do the right thing by the United Farm Workers, to be able to vote to vote in a way that limits the intimidation to actually vote by mail, and allow for free representation among farm workers without, the employers, the growers, corporate growers intimidating workers. He vetoed this legislation last year, and he's under, pressure from corporate agricultural interests to veto it again. And we're going to have to see whether or not he has any consideration for workers who, fed people through the pandemic, at great risk to their own health, often without health care, and to merely be able to choose a union in the same way that he got elected. So we're watching that among other legislation that is before him right now as well. So Charles, I'm going to stop there. And if folks have questions or comments, I didn't look at any of the chat, but
okay. Well, Mike, let me just give you a chance to check on with the chat, but I do have some pre-selected questions that I mentioned to you earlier. So I'll start with those if that's okay with you.
Sure.
You mentioned the governor. The governor has taken a different position than we expected on Prop 30. What do you think is the right position for labor on Prop 30?
Labor actually asserted huge, bold, leadership on this, and has gone neutral at the state level. And there are real conflicts among unions on this legislation. I'm not an expert on it, but there was vigorous debate at the last convention just a couple of weeks ago that was held here in San Francisco on this issue. And while the electrical, the IBEW, the Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, and other unions were strongly favorable, many of us just have this bitter taste in our mouth and don't want to do anything that subsidizes and supports Lyft, of all organizations, which, as I said earlier, was one of the major financiers of Prop 22. So, me, I'm no on 30, but there are other unions that are, are for it. And as a result, the state Federation of Labor on this issue is neutral.
Okay, very good. And you and I had talked about local issues, specifically Prop B, and you seem to have a position to offer on Prop B. This was about.
Yeah, Prop B was Prop B. There was a lot of, in typical San Francisco fashion, just a lot of, well, I'll be polite and say confusion, but it's really a lot of bullshit over this whole thing. And labor is opposed to it because it was originally passed to address a lot of the corruption. And in general, people think we should give it a chance to the legislation that was passed that separated these to give that a chance to work. The labor's union in particular were concerned about this and raised strong objections. So labor is no on B. The other legislation that I would note that we have strong position on is propositions is D and E. D is the mayor's legislation
Right.
allegedly to support the building of affordable housing. E is the legislation put forth by Connie Chan to create affordable, but to do it in a way that provides decent jobs. And, you know, this is, I can't tell you how frustrating it is for working people in San Francisco to have to travel hours, you know, either through BART or public transportation or car or other means to get to a job, you know, and have to go. I mean, we have members in our unions who live in all parts of that and have for 20 years, but it's gotten particularly worse now. And working people can't live here. And so there's no question we need affordable housing, but affordable housing built at the expense of good jobs that provide pensions, jobs that provide health care for their families, and jobs that provide a living wage, you know, is not the kind of development that we should be faced with. And it is so frustrating, you know, for so many of us to always see this pitted against each other. Oh, we can't build affordable housing if it's going to be union built, you know. The only union work that can get built is market rate or higher housing at more, that continues to drive working people out. And so it is of huge concern, and the community should not be split on good jobs versus affordable housing. It's a false debate. And I just wish that we could all do a better job in San Francisco of saying, yes, affordable housing, and yes, good jobs for the men and women that build that affordable housing.
Exactly. I sympathize very much with you. Two quick questions before we go on to questions from the audience. We had talked earlier about redistricting, and you had said something about redistricting. Yes, there was a court case that might or might not happen. And can you speak more about that?
On the redistricting, yeah, look, I wasn't in the middle of this. I know that there was some, there was, there were a lot of San Francisco hijinks being played, and, you know, everybody probably knows or read or heard about it and everything. But at the end of the day, you know, it's like the people who wanted to kind of keep the districts as they were just got out organized. And it's unfortunate the way it kind of went down. But, you know, it always comes down to what battles do you pick? And while there were a lot of folks within labor who had strong feelings about this, there wasn't enough to really mount, you know, an allied opposition to it. And so we're going to see where it rolls. But, you know, it's like, I think for most of us, it, you know, quickly moved to other priorities. Right.
And last question for me, there was an article that was in the New York Times, which you were surprised about what might happen if and when Nancy Pelosi is no longer a candidate.
Well, yeah, look, the reporter, I was there for a different event, and he said, I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions about, so he said, and he named potential successors. And at the time, we were in a particularly pitched battle in Sacramento with Scott Wiener over some issues related around housing, actually, and union access to the work, you know, being union good, union jobs, and the senator was not working very well with the labor movement on this. And so among the names that he named, I just said, well, I don't see labor getting behind that guy. So no, we're not on it. We're not on any kind of crusade, and we have no idea who's going to be, succeeding Nancy Pelosi. And quite frankly, with everything that's going on right now, I don't think it's a real serious discussion, given that we're, going to see a lot happening over the next 3 months here.
That's for sure. Thank you. Now, I want to ask the audience to go to reactions on this bar below you and to raise your hand so that you can get my attention that way. If you can't get my attention that way, well, then try something else. But I see that I have a hand raised, and Mary Eliza, you have a hand raised. Would you like to ask a question?
Sure, I'll ask a question. I put something in the chat about education. It seems like this idea of hiring more people is great. Do they exist? And how does the union or anybody get involved in training more nurses and more healthcare workers when it seems like we really have a shortage?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I'm not, that familiar with the healthcare, the actual operations of the healthcare industry. I just know that we spend a lot of money fighting healthcare corporations. In fact, that's what we do. We beat up one group of industries in order to give it to the healthcare industry so that they can spend it. And they're not spending enough, from everything I hear among the unions that represent workers. They're not spending enough on training. They're not spending enough on recruitment, and they're not spending enough on hiring. In fact, we face battles all the time in the labor movement, but especially in the healthcare industry over staffing. I mean, the nurses are always struggling to, get the hospitals to enforce the existing language in the contracts and the laws. So it's not that it's just a shortage, it's the way that they manage their businesses.
Okay, so do you think that there is a shortage, or that the shortage is created out of a problem?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm not familiar enough to know whether there's an actual shortage of people who want to be, nurses in the healthcare industry. I know that in our industry, in the hospitality industry, that has been stated, and in certain sectors of it, it is, but in other sectors, it's just the opposite. Workers are waiting, pleading to get back to work.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Rick Hall, you had a question?
Yes, there were two housing bills this year that were for building housing, changing commercial zoning in certain to residential zoning and allowing it. And for a long while, there was one was AB 2011, and the other was SB. And they both passed the legislature and are sitting on the governor's desk. Earlier on, there was discussion of a lot of union concerns with one or the other. I wonder if you could just reflect on that, if you know anything about it, and let us know if the unions are doing anything to influence a governor veto on one of them.
I don't know exactly where the building trades is right now, and the legislation that I heard throughout was referred to as the Buffy Wicks legislation. It was one of those. Is that the AB legislation that you referred to? Was she the sponsor? Is that the one?
Yeah.
Yeah, and there was a lot of resistance to that, and it was a struggle because Buffy Wicks is supported by a lot of labor in the East Bay, but this legislation didn't include the language that would support that these jobs would be good jobs. They only carved out a little bit of stuff. They wouldn't have the language making reference to skilled and trained and skilled workers that, you know, are apprenticed through the labor movement and state things. And she took the wrong side on that one for the trades. And it was interesting because it was controversial as well within labor, because a couple unions said, well, get that stuff later. Let's get this done now. So I understood that there was a compromise reached right towards the end of the session. But I don't know exactly whether it stayed in the legislation that is before the governor right now.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before we go on, I just want to say, Mary Harris, I love the Ukrainian flag in your picture. And let me ask now that we have a pause, if anybody else has a question they would like to ask Mike, because we have him for a few minutes still, and we can ask him numerous questions if anybody's willing. Well, seeing none, let me just ask one question. George Wooding, do you have a question? I can't imagine that you don't. Is he on mute?
Yeah,
Oh, well.
you're on mute, George. Here,
Happening right now, the union is trying to overthrow the current board of trustees at City College, and they're walled away. And I was wondering if he felt it was a good thing that unions take over City College.
No, I don't think it's a good thing that anybody takes over City College.
That's what I thought.
City College is a public institution, and it's supposed to be, you know, representative of the community. Now, do I think that it's a good thing that union members actually participate on the governing board of City College? Absolutely, I do. Just like I think that, you know, the board should be represented by people who have, you know, unique skills that help, you know, like finance or whatever. But, you know, yeah, I think it's a good thing that union members are running for City College. But, you know, a takeover of the board is hardly what I would describe folks exercising their right to run for city, you know, for city office.
Well, I think what's happened is they've cut classes. Obviously, they've cut a lot of union members down, and it's hurt the union at City College. So their response was, we are going to come back and hurt the board. And we're more responsible than the board of trustees. So it's just a very different direction some of the union members want to take than the existing trustees. And the existing trustees, after 7 years of, well, basically screwing up, not fitting in with the state, have finally managed to reach at least an equilibrium. So it's fascinates me, after studying it for a long time, that the reward there will be that they may all be voted out, or at least in the minority. But thank you for your answer.
Thank you, George. Question. Claire, we have time for one more question from you.
Okay, I'm concerned about the food industry in San Francisco and wanting to know what you see for both the whole restaurant side, but also the fast food industry, and if we're going to have more unionization in some of our fast food what, employers? What do you see for that, Mike?
Yeah, good question, Claire. Because there's a lot of good work going on in that area, including, especially, I'd note, well, our union does. I mean, we represent actually more fast food workers than probably any other union, but SEIU has really been, I think, a unique leader in this, that they've, helped raise the fight for 15, getting up to $15. That's an example of a union really taking on a fight and driving it and making a big difference in a lot of workers' lives. The problem is, because of the turnover within the industry, it's really difficult to organize because the laws don't provide for a speedy election process. In fact, to the contrary, as I said earlier, and this, Claire, even though you spend a lot of time in the public sector, you're an activist in the labor movement, so you're well familiar with what goes on.
Yep.
So the legislation that recently got passed, calling for fast food councils, may end up being, part of the solution to that puzzle. I'm a little worried, though, that we're going to see the fast food industry mount the kind of campaign against this recent legislation that got passed on fast food councils. I think that they're likely to line up the same kind of fight that we just saw with Prop 22. So again, an industry is going to be looking to change laws that have been passed at the legislature.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay, thank you for your question, Claire. You may remember a year or two ago, I wrote an editorial for the newsletter about the sorry state of food service in San Francisco. And little known fact is, I used to be in the trade back in Miami for 5 years. I gave up education and I did food instead in the design district. Okay, last chance. Anybody else want to ask a question?
Yes, if it's okay,
Oh,
Mike.
sorry, I didn't see your hand, right?
That's okay. If it's okay, Mike, I'd like to get in touch with you offline to connect you with some of the union workers who are working with Park and Rec, who actually like the change that was brought about and oppose so I'd like to get you in touch with those people, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah. Charles knows how to reach me. So does Claire.
Right.
So yeah.
You're very reachable. Thank you, Mike.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
All
And you're
right.
still my favorite looking actor.
Who is that?
I can't remember his name. That's the problem. I'm having a senior moment here, but I'll remember and get back to you. 3 o'clock.
Gary Dean
Bridges. Jeff
What else?
Bridges' brother, right?
Harry Dean Stanton.
It could be. Could
Yeah.
very well be.
He's a great
Yeah.
actor. He's dead
Yeah.
though.
All right. Hey, nice talking to you all. And I hope that, we're going to be able to work together ongoing basis. I really do think that the work you all do really is not just, great, as Martin described earlier, the changes that really happen at the neighborhood level. But in my view, the kind of activism and activists that goes on in community, that's the very basis and foundation of democracy. So, we may not always be on the same side, but I have utmost respect for the organizations that, do the kind of work that hold government accountable at a community level every day. So thanks a lot for the work that you all do.